When thinking about the most impactful draft classes of all time, usually years like 1984, 1996, and 2003 come to mind. In fact, it seems like every playoffs of the last 35 years involves players from these three stellar draft classes. When it comes to this year's playoffs, however, what if I told you it was one of the worst draft classes ever that made the biggest impact? This is how the 2013 draft shaped the landscape of the 2020 postseason. The 2013 draft was seen as a weak class from the get-go, but the only thing worse than the lack of talent was how it all went down.
The Cleveland Cavaliers select Anthony Bennett of Toronto, Canada.
We can all remember where we were when Anthony Bennett got drafted number 1. And we can talk about how the Cavs had 5 top 5 picks in 4 years and walked away with Anthony Bennett, Dion Waiters, Tristan Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, and 6 years of Kyrie Irving. But that's not what this video is about. Where things really start to affect the 2020 playoffs is the pick right after this, when the Orlando Magic select Victor Oladipo at number 2. See, it isn't even really what Oladipo did with the Magic that really matters here, though he did put up some good numbers. It's the fact that he is in Orlando with a terrible front office that ships him, Ersan Ilyasova, and Domantas Sabonis to the Thunder for Serge Ibaka.
What the hell was that?
Nobody has to tell you how terrible this trade was, but more importantly than that, it wouldn't be Depot or Sabonis' final destination. After 1 year with OKC, Oladipo and Sabonis get traded to Indiana for Paul George, forming the current Pacers nucleus. The team hasn't missed the playoffs since, with health being the biggest hurdle for the young duo, as they would lose this year to Miami. The Pacers don't get Depot or Sabonis unless they're drafted by a terrible front office in the Magic that shipped them to OKC, and Paul George probably doesn't get to go to OKC if Orlando handles their talent correctly and keeps their 2 young stars. But it all starts with Orlando drafting Victor Oladipo at number 2. If Victor stays put, chances are the Paul George saga goes differently as well. He probably doesn't end up with OKC, making his eventual journey to the Clippers this year uncertain as well. Imagine what other all-star Kawhi could have chosen to team up with. After Oladipo, there's some semi-consequential picks like Nerlens Noel, who the Sixers would trade for Drew Holiday, a player that they could really use today. But the next player that would really affect the 2020 playoffs was drafted number 10 with CJ McCollum. Now, how this affects the current playoffs is a lot more straightforward. A lot of mock drafts had CJ going at 7 or 8, which would have landed him in Sacramento or Detroit. Instead, he falls to 10, where Portland creates one of the more talented backcourts of the last decade. Once again, bad front offices come in clutch here, as the Pistons could have easily picked CJ up at 8, but instead go with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
It is what it is. It is what it is.
CJ often goes underrated because he's paired with maybe the best point guard in 2020, Damian Lillard. But make no mistake, the Blazers do not make the playoffs this year without Dame's right-hand man. Moving on to pick 11, the Sixers select Michael Carter Williams. The pick itself doesn't seem to affect the current Sixers roster very much because, well, he's 5 years out of Philly. But this was Sam Hinkie's debut first-round pick, and his whole draft the best player available regardless of position or skill theory was made known. And when Michael Carter Williams wins Rookie of the Year, he feels like his stance is validated. And his stubbornness would kind of show after this pick. MCW begins to tail off due to his inability to shoot the ball, so Hinkie trades him and drafts Ben Simmons, a player with a very similar problem. Simmons was the best prospect available though, so Hinkie drafts him, and the Sixers are thrust into playoff mediocrity for the next 3 years.
Always trust the process.
If MCW doesn't work out at all, maybe Sam Hinkie rethinks his theory, and, I don't know, trades down in 2016 for a player like Jamal Murray. But instead, Michael Carter Williams' 1 year of success due to him falling to the Sixers in the 2013 draft would set Philly in the wrong direction. One could argue that Steven Adams at slot 12 affected the playoffs in some way this year. But it pales in comparison when you see that Giannis Antetokounmpo was drafted at 15 by the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll keep it short and sweet here. Even though the Bucks probably didn't know that Giannis would turn into an MVP, it doesn't matter. They win this draft by getting the best player in the class by far, with his presence alone making the Bucks one of few title favorites this year. After Giannis, again there's some notable mentions here, like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dennis Schroeder, who made their mark on this year's playoffs, but were only able to do so because they were originally drafted by terrible franchises. They were completely dwarfed by the 27th pick in Rudy Gobert. Getting Rudy at 27 is obviously a steal, but this pick actually affects two teams immensely, and in strangely similar ways. The Nuggets are actually the ones who drafted him, but they ended up trading him away for cash considerations and a second-round pick to Utah, and then the Jazz would fleece the Nuggets again in 2017, when they would get Donovan Mitchell for Trey Lyles and the 24th pick, forming their current nucleus. But let's focus on 2013. The Nuggets trading away Rudy Gobert for basically nothing can definitely be seen as a misstep, but their actions in 2013 will lead up to them drafting another big man in 2014, Mr. Nikola Jokic. So by picking up Rudy Gobert and then trading him in 2013, the Nuggets set them and the Jazz up to have their franchise big men going forward, and the two teams would clash in this year's playoffs in a 7-game series. So in this crazy and mishandled first round of the 2013 draft, the Magic, Thunder, Pacers, Clippers, Blazers, Sixers, Bucks, Jazz, and Nuggets were all playoff teams that were affected pretty directly by a bunch of GM mistakes. There are some other stretches here, like if Kelly Olynyk isn't drafted by the Celtics at 13, maybe Kevin Love's shoulder stays in place and LeBron wins the 2015 championship with any semblance of help, and he stays in Cleveland, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we'll accept the more undisputable effects that the 2013 draft had on over half of the teams participating in the 2020 playoffs. And with all that being said, it's not even how we got here, it's how the whole thing plays out. So with the 2013 draft setting up the scene in 2020, who do you got?